Message of dialogue. Pope Francis arrives in Bahrain for the country's first papal visit. How he's using the trip to promote peace. Crunch time. We follow President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump on the campaign trail with midterm elections just days away. On Poland's border, we'll update issues of security and migration from the war in neighboring Ukraine. And Sacrament of Penance, recovering the practice of confession for the faithful. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, November 3rd, 2022. Good evening and thank you for being with us tonight on the Feast of St. Martin de Porres. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sable. Pope Francis has arrived in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Today, the Holy Father was greeted by Bahrain's king. A welcome ceremony followed. It's the first time a pope has visited the Persian Gulf country. The Holy Father's focus will be on interreligious dialogue. Pope Francis will spend 4 days in the majority Muslim nation. We'll have a complete report tomorrow from Bahrain. Meantime, President Joe Biden kicked off a 4-state, 3-day campaign swing today, heading to New Mexico and California in an effort to keep his party in power. Well, in the middle of the country, former President Donald Trump is holding a rally of his own for his America First candidates. This comes just hours after President Biden ripped into President Trump during a speech last night. White House correspondent Owen Jensen joins us from the campaign trail in Sioux City, Iowa. Owen.
Hi, Eric. We arrived here in a very windy Sioux City, Iowa early this morning and found people already lined up to see former President Donald Trump speak here tonight, where the signs behind me simply say, "Save America." Meanwhile, last night, President Biden gave a speech as well to Americans. His message was, "Save democracy" from the former president.
President Joe Biden heads west today to rally Democrats. Just last night at Union Station in Washington, D.C., he tore into former President Donald Trump.
You know, American democracy is under attack because the defeated former president of the United States refuses to accept the results of the 2020 election. He refuses to accept the will of the people. He refuses to accept the fact that he lost.
But the president of the Heritage Foundation tweeted, "How appropriate that the worst president in history would deliver yet another divider-in-chief speech at Union Station, an icon of a failed, corrupt, lawless city with dilapidated infrastructure and, even worse, a mounting human toll of liberal elites' demagoguery and corruption." Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris also on the campaign trail trying to lift up Democrats last night in Boston and today in New York. She continues to push abortion, tweeting today, "We must elect more Democrats to Congress in the midterm elections and fight to protect this fundamental right." But SBA Pro-Life America warns Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and their pro-abortion allies in Washington are determined to use the White House to force taxpayer funding of abortion at home and abroad.
Everything fine?
And President Trump fighting Democrats not only on the campaign trail, but also in the courts. He just released a statement regarding a lawsuit filed against the Trump Organization, writing, "If I were not elected president of the United States and now leading in the polls by substantial margins against both Democrats and Republicans, this would not be happening. We have to stand up for our country, fight against illegal persecution, and make America great again."
And joining former President Donald Trump tonight, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and U.S. Senator from Iowa Chuck Grassley, both seeking re-election. We also learned this afternoon that President Biden will be stopping in Chicago tomorrow for another political event as the race to next Tuesday winds down very fast. In Sioux City, Iowa, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, thank you, Owen. Let's now check in with Chris Bedford, Executive Director of Common Sense Society. Chris, welcome back as always, and a lot to discuss. But first, what's your take on President's remarks overall last night?
I think I don't understand exactly who the target audience for those remarks were. I know that there are a quarter of people in the White House who are very obsessed with this January 6th narrative, with this democracy under attack narrative, with this idea that the Republican Party or their political opposition are all fascists or monarchs or whatever, autocrats, whatever they want to call them. But that's not something that's really been moving anybody in the polls. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times did a poll which found that of those people, which is a lot of people in this country, who feel that democracy is under threat, Democrats polled worse than Republicans did. Donald Trump registered too. but no one registered nearly as poorly as the corporate media in this country for undermining democracy. This message has not been getting out very well. And it was interesting to see the president give this speech from Union Station, which is actually a symbol of the kind of things that American people are voting on this election. They're voting about crime problems. They're voting about their communities being attacked. They're voting about drugs on the streets. They're voting about rampant, criminally insane people who are out and have tents in a lot of these cities, or even now in the suburbs of those cities. That's what Union Station has become. But he chose this message instead. And if I was a Democrat who was in a close election that's trying to talk right now and pivot to talk about strengthening the police, strengthening the community, strengthening jobs, fighting inflation, I would not find the president's speech to be helpful politically.
As Owen mentioned, former President Donald Trump continues to draw crowds wherever he goes. And what do you make of his campaign? It seems like he's keeping a little bit of a low profile out there.
Well, he's going where he's asked, but people are candidates are certainly using them. Some candidates. I mean, if you're running in Virginia, which may be a more purple state, then a Donald Trump rally is not necessarily going to help you. But as far as politicians go, he's a rock star entertainer. His rallies come with comedy, they come with music, they have a tailgate. If you're running an election in Iowa, like Chuck Grassley is, it's a little close. Well, then it'd be wonderful for Donald Trump to get those voters revved up, show that you're alongside them. And that's been one of his major strengths on the campaign trails, who he's willing to go out and hold those rallies for when they want him.
What exactly are you going to be watching for on election night next week?
I'm going to be watching New York. I'm going to be watching Maine. I'm going to be watching Virginia, because those are some of the places that are going to be happening very early in the evening. It's going to be maybe a couple of days before we find out if there's a Republican governor in Oregon for the first time in almost 40 years. But those states are going to be good indicators of Pennsylvania early, whether or not this is going to be a normal Republican win, which is historically what we look for after a Democrat's been in the White House, and vice versa. The party that's in the White House always gets beat up a little bit 2 years afterwards. But these states, if they start to go completely red and Democrats start to fall everywhere, then you start to wonder, is this going to be a Republican wave or an absolute Republican massacre, which is possible. But if you see Pennsylvania go blue, and you see a couple places in Maine or New York that start to go blue and they win tough challenges, then you can be sure that this race is going to be maybe more traditional and more as the Democrats are hoping.
Let's talk about a little bit about the issues. Republicans have been concentrating on, of course, the inflation, the crisis at the border. What do you think are most important to voters out there?
Well, that's absolutely what's going on. There's a reporter a very liberal reporter who just went down and was interviewing some of the Hispanic voters in Texas, and was shocked to find out that those Hispanics are switching to the Republican Party because of their concerns over immigration and finding bodies in their fields and crime in their communities, illegal immigration in those communities. The Republicans have largely been on message, and a good way to indicate that or to show that is there was a report recently in the Washington Examiner by Sarah Westwood that looked at Democrats' first campaign ads and looked at their final campaign ads. The early ones were very much focused on the Dobbs decision, on abortion, on a lot of the different woke aspects of the politics. And by the end, their final message to voters was how they were going to help the economy, how they were going to be tough on crime, essentially adopting late pastel versions of the Republican messaging the entire time. And that shows me that the GOP had the strong messaging in this campaign.
And very quickly, what other stories are you following right now?
Right now, the main thing, I think, is certainly going to, of course, be the election and the coming recession, the two of those combined. Because people start to think sometimes that the election means everything is going to be good. If you're a Republican, oh, it's great, my guys are back in office. If you're a Democrat, oh, that's great, my guys are back in office. But the reality is the parties govern fairly similarly at the end of the day, outside of maybe finance. So if you're someone who's worried about the future of this country, worried about the direction we're going, worried about our civic institutions, then how is this new GOP going to govern? Are they going to take the lessons of a more feisty kind of Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump level GOP that's going to take it to their opponents, or are they just going to be more of the same? That's going to be the real show.
Absolutely love your insight, Chris. Chris Bedford, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. It's great.
In other news, the attack late last week on Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, comes on the heels of a rise in threats against political leaders, judges, and others. A number of lawmakers are speaking out, and they're demanding better safety measures and want answers from law enforcement. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, who heads up the committee overseeing the U.S. Capitol Police, wrote a 5-page letter to the chief of police earlier this week asking for more protections. Quote, this incident and related circumstances, including the manner in which the speaker and her family were targeted, raise significant questions about security protections for members of Congress, particularly those in the presidential line of succession. U.S. Capitol Police say they are investigating the incident that took place in San Francisco. The Capitol Police Threat Assessment Team says threats against lawmakers have more than doubled since 2017. In 2017, just over 3,900 cases were reported. In 2021, that number jumped to more than 9,600 cases. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says violence against lawmakers is nothing new.
And we've watched this with Lee Zeldin. We watched this with Supreme Court judges. This is wrong. Violence should not go. You watch what happened to Steve Scalise and others. This has got to stop.
Senator Rick Scott, chair of the Republican Campaign Committee, says lawmakers have had to find their own ways to pay for security.
As I went to the Federal Election Commission, said, could our candidates and our senators use their campaign dollars to pay for security? Because, as you know, House and Senate members don't have security, most of them outside of D.C.
It's important to note that back in July, the House Administration Office authorized some $10,000 worth of security equipment and installation costs for each lawmaker to be used in their private homes. Meanwhile, the U.S. Capitol Police are calling for even more resources to protect members of Congress. Oral arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court were interrupted yesterday by 3 abortion supporters. The women shouted their objections to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The 3 women were arrested and charged. At the time, the justices were hearing arguments on a bank secrecy case. A U.S. Supreme Court says a female-only beauty pageant will not be forced to include a biological male contestant. In its ruling yesterday, the court says doing so would have violated the First Amendment. Alliance Freedom Defending Freedom represented the pageant. ADF says ignoring the reality that women and men are different harms women and their opportunities to win. Coming up, more North Korea missile launches have 2 U.S. allies on edge. Plus, why Israel's former prime minister may return to power. Welcome back. North Korea fired 3 missiles today. That prompted the Japanese government to issue evacuation alerts. The incident also forced Japan to halt train service. The launches are the latest by North Korea in the region, causing concern for U.S. allies there. Yesterday, Pyongyang fired more than 20 missiles, the most it has ever launched in a single day. South Korea is also reacting to the latest missile launches.
평양 순안 일대에서 동해상으로 발사된 장거리 탄도미사일.
A defense minister calls the North's recent activities a serious threat to the Korean Peninsula and the world. In response, a meeting is set to take place tomorrow at the Pentagon between U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and South Korea's defense ministry. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has won this week's election in Israel. This follows the concession by the current prime minister. According to the final results, which are still being certified, Netanyahu and his coalition have taken the majority of parliament. He is expected to form one of the most conservative governments in recent history. This is Israel's 5th election in 4 years. Poland is beefing up security along its border with Russia. Polish soldiers are laying razor wire and installing cameras. This as the Kremlin announces plans to launch military flights from the Middle East and North Africa area. We go now to Iwo Bender, Regional Manager of EWTN in Central and Eastern Europe. Iwo, thank you so much for joining us. And we know that you're based in Poland, but what can you tell us about these latest efforts along the border?
Well, glad to be here. Thank you for having me. Well, what we are having now in the short border, it's just a bit longer than 100 miles between Russia and Poland. There's a Russian enclave, rather exclave, called Kaliningrad. We have reports that Russia is trying to repeat the gambit that they tried together with Belarus last year of bringing people from all over the world, literally, who wanted to migrate to Western Europe, and basically using them as human weapons to push them into Poland under, having lied to them that they will be admitted, if they cross the border illegally. So we had tens of thousands of them last year. They're attacking the police, border guards, etc. And we have reports that this might be happening this time on the Belarusian border. So now Polish border guards and Polish military are putting up a fence along that the Polish-Russian border.
Wow. And we know that Poland has already received over 1 million Ukrainian refugees, the highest among any countries in the European Union. How is the country managing this influx of people and manage all these refugees headed their way?
Well, you can look at it from, two perspectives, the sort of simple numbers. So we have about 400,000 Ukrainians who are working legally in Poland. And remember that these are by far mostly women who came here with children. And we have about 300,000 children, Ukrainian children, learning in Polish schools. So in fact, you hear Ukrainian every day as you walk down the street in Warsaw. So that's one level, the state level. So they were all issued the Polish equivalent of the social security number, which gives them the ability to work. And again, they're absolutely willing to do that. And you can look at it from a sort of, human, personal perspective. So for instance, EWTN Poland employed a lady who came from Ukraine. Her husband was killed earlier in the war, and she works as editor at EWTN Poland.
Amen to that. It's what the Lord calls us to do. Before I let you go, I did want to ask you about the EWTN affiliate in Poland. Last week, YouTube suspended the channel for the second time in less than 2 years. What can you tell us more about this?
Well, the backbone of the YouTube channel is the perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament from a chapel in Niepokalanów, the monastery that was built by Saint Maximilian Kolbe. And it's amazing because, it's basically the monstrance and chapel where people come and go. And this is all that is being shown on this particular feed. And it has been immensely popular, especially during the COVID lockdowns. People from literally all over the world flocked to it. And first it was suspended in April last year. And after a barrage of media outrage, basically all over the world, we were contacted by YouTube and said, it was a mistake, whatever, let's restore it. This time the situation repeated, but the channel was actually not suspended, but completely canceled. Wow. And we were getting mixed explanation of what happened, but after 3 days, it was, thank God, restored.
Well, continue to do the hands and feet of Jesus, the work there. Iwo Bender, a pleasure to always to speak with you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Up next, the remains of an ancient monastery are found in a surprising location. Plus, recovering the Sacrament of Confession as an experience of God's mercy. A Vatican office organized a seminar to talk about the Sacrament of Confession. Prompted by the Apostolic Penitentiary, the initiative aims to focus attention on the other side of the confessional, that of the faithful who approach the sacrament to obtain God's forgiveness and those wanting to rediscover the sacrament. Joining us now from Rome is Monsignor Carlos Encina from the Apostolic Penitentiary. Monsignor, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about this seminar and why the Sacrament of Confession is so important to Catholics?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, we had a seminary about confession. It was the first time we offered this kind of course for lay people. And I think it was a great success. We had about 150 people participating in this seminary. And it was about the Sacrament of Confession, a sacrament that in some places in the world it's not very popular. So we thought it was necessary to offer this seminary to lay people.
Very important there.
About 30 years ago, about 30 years ago, we started offering at the penitentiary a corso del foro interno, a course of the internal foro, but it was only for priests and seminarians. And this is the first time we offer something for lay people.
Beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit more about your organization and the work that you do?
Well, the penitentiary is a tribunal, a sui generis tribunal, and we grant absolutions to some very serious sins that are considered delicts in canon law. I will mention you these delicts that are of our competency: the profanation of the consecrated species, the direct violation of sacramental seal of confession, the absolution of one's accomplice in a sin against the sixth commandment of the Decalogue, the use of physical force against the person of the Roman pontiff, and the consecration of a bishop without pontifical mandate. Of these 5 sins or delicts that I mentioned to you, the most frequent are the first 3 that I mentioned.
And not every Christian faith out there believes in confession. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important for Catholics?
It's very important to live in a state of grace in order to be prepared to enter into heaven. That's why there's this sacrament that heals our soul. If you lose the sanctifying grace by a serious sin, it's necessary to be reconciled with God again. And that's why Jesus instituted this sacrament.
And what exactly would you tell the people out there who don't believe that confession is that important?
If they believe they are saints, I understand that they don't need this sacrament, but my experience is that, my personal experience is that we are all sinners. And even the Holy Father goes to confession. I have seen him going to confession at the Basilica of St. Peter's. So these people shouldn't be scared of this sacrament. It is the sacrament of joy, how the Pope has said many times. We have nothing to lose when we go to confession.
Amen to that. Thank you so much, Monsignor, for joining us today. Thank you so much, and God bless you. And finally, tonight we return to the Persian Gulf, where we began this evening, to an ancient Christian monastery discovered in the United Arab Emirates. The site is a sand dune island on the country's northeast coast, just about an hour's flight from Bahrain, where the Pope Francis is now visiting. The remains appear to show a baptismal font as well as an oven to bake either bread or communion hosts. Archaeologists believe that it dates back around 1,500 years to a time when Islam's founder Muhammad was born. It marks the second ancient Christian monastery found in the Emirates. Well, we want to thank you so much for watching tonight from the entire EWTN News Nightly team. I'm Eric Rosales. Have a great night, and God bless.